My fiancé announced. My ex-lover is my man of honor at our wedding, or there's no wedding. I calmly said, your choice. Then I canceled the venue, refunded the guests, and sent her a bill for my half. When her ex found out he'd be paying for the wedding instead, my name's Adrian Carter, and at 32 years old, I genuinely believed I had my life figured out. I mean, sure, I wasn't some tech billionaire flying around in a private jet or anything, but I had a decent job, a solid apartment in a neighborhood where the gunshots were only occasional, and most importantly, I was 6 weeks away from marrying the woman I thought was my soulmate. Melissa Gray, 29, beautiful, smart, and apparently harboring some seriously questionable decision-making skills that I was about to discover in the most spectacular fashion possible. We'd been together for 4 years, which in modern dating terms is basically a lifetime commitment already, and I'd put a ring on her finger that cost me 3 months' salary, because apparently that's still a thing we're doing as a society. The invitations had been sent out to 150 of our closest friends, family members, and random cousins we barely remembered but felt obligated to invite, because Thanksgiving would be awkward otherwise. We'd booked this absolutely ridiculous mansion venue that looked like something out of a romance novel, complete with gardens and fountains, and probably a few peacocks wandering around for ambience. $28,000. That's how much we'd already sunk into this wedding. 28 grand that could have bought me a decent used car, a trip around the world, or literally anything else besides overpriced centerpieces and a DJ who promised he really knew how to read a crowd. Hell, even my Aunt Carla was on some crazy diet, so she could fit into her dress, and if you knew Aunt Carla, you'd understand that her voluntarily giving up her nightly ice cream ritual was basically the eighth wonder of the modern world. Everything was going according to plan, or so I thought, right up until that fateful Tuesday evening when Melissa decided to detonate a nuclear bomb right in the middle of our relationship. We were having dinner at her place, nothing fancy, just some pasta she'd made that was honestly a bit overcooked, but I wasn't going to say anything because I'm not an idiot. I was sitting there, twirling my fork through the slightly mushy penne, thinking about whether we needed to confirm the final head count with the caterer, when Melissa suddenly put her fork down with that deliberate little clink that every man in a relationship immediately recognizes as the sound of impending doom. She gave me what I can only describe as her serious face, which is this particular expression where her eyebrows do this thing and her lips get all tight, and I instantly knew that whatever was about to come out of her mouth was going to ruin my evening at minimum, possibly my entire week. I braced myself, thinking maybe she wanted to talk about the seating chart again or whether we should do a cash bar, which I'd already told her was tacky, but she kept bringing up because her college friends were apparently all broke. But no, what came out of her mouth was so far beyond seating charts and cash bars that I actually had to replay it in my head a few times to make sure I'd heard correctly. Adrian, she said, using that tone that people use when they're about to ask you for something completely unreasonable but want to pretend it's totally normal. My ex, Logan, he needs to be my man of honor. I just sat there for a second, my fork suspended in midair like time had stopped, processing what she'd just said. Logan. She wanted Logan at our wedding. Not as a guest tucked away at some table in the back corner near the bathrooms. Not as some distant acquaintance she'd waved to politely during cocktail hour. As her man of honor, standing right there at the altar with us. I blinked a few times, set my fork down very carefully because I was suddenly afraid I might throw it, and said, Logan. As in Logan who cheated on you with your roommate Logan? That Logan. She had the audacity to nod like this was the most reasonable request in the world. Yes, that Logan. He's my best friend, Adrian. He's been there for me through everything. I actually laughed at that point, but it wasn't a funny laugh. It was more like that laugh you do when someone tells you they've been selected by a Nigerian prince to receive $10 million and they just need your social security number to process the transfer. It was a laugh that said, surely you cannot be serious right now. I asked her to explain to me how exactly the guy who betrayed her trust, destroyed her living situation, and caused her to move back in with her parents for 3 months qualified as best friend material. But she just got defensive and started going on about how people make mistakes and he'd apologized and they'd worked through it. And now they had this incredibly special bond that I apparently couldn't understand because I'd never been betrayed by someone I loved. The irony of that statement, given what was currently happening, was completely lost on her. I sat there listening to her justify why her cheating ex-boyfriend needed to be standing next to her on what was supposed to be our wedding day, and I could feel something fundamental shifting in my chest. It was like watching someone you thought you knew suddenly reveal they were actually a completely different person wearing a very convincing mask for 4 years. She kept talking, explaining how Logan had really changed, how he was in a good place now with his girlfriend Ashley, how it would mean so much to her to have him there in this important role, and I just stared at my pasta getting colder on the plate in front of me. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was probably only about 5 minutes of her talking in circles, she looked at me with this expression that was half pleading and half challenging, and she delivered the line that would ultimately end our relationship right there in her kitchen with the overcooked pasta and the discount wine we'd bought from Trader Joe's. Either Logan is my man of honor, or there's no wedding. Just like that. An ultimatum. She'd actually given me an ultimatum about including her ex-boyfriend in our wedding, and from the look on her face, she genuinely believed I was going to cave. She thought I'd sputter and argue and eventually come around, because what was I going to do? Actually cancel the wedding over this? She'd miscalculated badly. I felt this weird calm wash over me, the kind of calm you feel when you've been stressing about making a difficult decision and suddenly the decision makes itself. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms across my chest, looked her dead in the eyes, and said in the most level, controlled voice I could manage, "Your choice." Her face went through this fascinating series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, a flicker of anger, then back to confusion, like her brain was buffering trying to process that I hadn't immediately started begging her to reconsider. She opened her mouth to say something, probably to walk it back or soften it or explain that she didn't really mean no wedding. But I was already standing up, grabbing my jacket from the back of the chair, and heading for the door. I walked out of her apartment, got in my car, and drove home in complete silence, my mind already shifting into a mode I recognized from work, that cold analytical state where emotions take a back seat and you just start systematically solving problems. By the time I pulled into my parking spot, I knew exactly what I was going to do, and Melissa had absolutely no idea what was about to hit her. Melissa genuinely thought I was bluffing, which is honestly hilarious in retrospect, because anyone who'd spent more than 5 minutes with me would know that bluffing is absolutely not in my skill set. I'm the guy who told my boss I'd quit if he didn't approve my vacation days, and then actually quit when he called what he thought was my bluff. I don't make threats I'm not prepared to follow through on, but apparently 4 years together hadn't taught Melissa this fundamental aspect of my personality. Spoiler alert for anyone keeping score at home, I was definitely not bluffing. The moment I walked through my apartment door that night, I didn't collapse on the couch with a beer and some sad Netflix documentary about failed relationships. Nope. I walked straight into my home office, fired up my laptop, cracked my knuckles like I was about to hack into the Pentagon, and started systematically dismantling our wedding like I was a corporate liquidator shutting down a failing business. This is what happens when you give an ultimatum to a guy who's spent the last 8 years working in project management. By the way, we don't do emotional meltdowns. We do spreadsheets and action items. First up was the venue, that ridiculous mansion with the peacocks that I'm pretty sure were just regular birds they painted or something. I pulled up the contract, found the cancellation clause that I'd thankfully read when we first booked it because I'm paranoid like that, and fired off an email to their events coordinator. Professional, polite, to the point. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we need to cancel our wedding scheduled for 6 weeks from now. Please process the cancellation according to the terms outlined in Section 7.3 of our contract and advise on refund timelines. Send. Done. Next victim on my list was the caterer, this fancy company that charged basically a car payment per person for chicken that probably tasted exactly like grocery store rotisserie chicken, but came with a fancy name and garnishes. Another email, same professional tone, cancellation requested, please confirm receipt. I was on a roll now, and there was something deeply satisfying about watching years of planning get systematically dismantled with the click of a mouse. The photographer, some artsy guy who'd shown us his portfolio of couples gazing lovingly into each other's eyes and fields of wildflowers, got his cancellation notice. The florist who'd convinced Melissa that we absolutely needed peonies, even though they cost approximately the same as actual gold, canceled. The baker who was going to create some five-tier monstrosity that would probably taste like fancy cardboard, gone. Even the DJ, the one who'd promised he could really read a crowd, and had played Sweet Caroline at literally every wedding he'd ever done based on his demo reel, received his termination notice. But here's where it gets really fun. And by fun, I mean slightly unhinged in a way that I'm not entirely proud of, but also absolutely don't regret. My mom, bless her heart, had insisted on hiring a mariachi band for the cocktail hour because apparently she decided our wedding needed to honor our heritage. Even though we're about as Mexican as mayonnaise, and the closest my family's ever been to Mexico was that one Taco Bell that opened up near my childhood home. I'd argued against it. Melissa had thought it was quirky and fun, and Mom had already paid the deposit, so the mariachi band had been locked in. Well, guess what? Los Hermanos Musicales, or whatever they were called, got their cancellation email too. Gone. Cancelled. Adios, amigos. Every single vendor who'd been counting on our wedding for their income got a professionally worded email explaining that due to circumstances beyond our control, we would no longer be requiring their services. I even canceled the ridiculous ice sculpture that was supposed to be two swans forming a heart, which honestly I'd always thought was tacky anyway, but Melissa had seen it at her cousin's wedding and absolutely had to have it. By midnight, I was really hitting my stride, operating on pure spite and whatever cold brew coffee I had left in my fridge. I moved on to the hotel room blocks we'd reserved for out-of-town guests, canceled those, and I'm pretty sure the hotel desk person who responded to my 12:47 a.m. email thought I was having some kind of breakdown based on the concerned tone of their response. Then came the hard part. Well, hard in terms of tedious, not emotionally difficult, because at this point I was running on pure adrenaline and vindication. The guest list. 150 people who'd received their fancy embossed invitations with the tissue paper and the little RSVP cards, and had probably already bought outfits and made plans and requested time off work. I opened up a fresh email, BCC'd all 150 email addresses because I'm not a monster who makes people suffer through seeing everyone else's contact info, and I crafted what might be the most professionally written "sorry your party's canceled" email in the history of canceled weddings. Dear friends and family, we regret to inform you that the wedding of Adrian Carter and Melissa Gray, previously scheduled for 6 weeks from today, has been canceled. We apologize for any inconvenience this may cause, including travel arrangements, accommodations, or other plans you may have made. For those who have sent gifts, refunds will be processed within 7 to 10 business days. Thank you for your understanding and support during this time. I read it over 3 times, made sure there were no typos because even in my spite-fueled cancellation rampage, I still had standards, and then I hovered my mouse over the send button for maybe 5 seconds before clicking it. Boom. Done. 150 people simultaneously finding out their plans for 6 weeks from now had just been obliterated. I'm sure their inboxes loved me for that 1:23 a.m. notification. Very professional, very HR approved, very. I'm not going to give you any drama or details, just a clean break and an apology for wasting your time. But I wasn't done yet. Oh no. Because the rational part of my brain that hadn't been completely taken over by the cancellation spree suddenly piped up and said, "Hey buddy, you know what would make this even better? A spreadsheet." And you know what? That rational part of my brain was absolutely right. Nothing says, I'm handling my emotional devastation in a healthy and productive manner, quite like Microsoft Excel at 2 in the morning. I created a beautiful, color-coded spreadsheet with tabs for every category of expense. Venue costs, catering, photography, flowers, invitations, that stupid ice sculpture, the mariachi band Mom had insisted on, everything. I meticulously entered every single expense, every deposit we'd paid, every contract we'd signed, and then I calculated the total damage. $28,000. 28 grand flushed down the toilet of what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. I created another column for refunds, because thankfully some vendors had reasonable cancellation policies and weren't going to keep all of our money just because we decided to implode our relationship 6 weeks before the big day. Some of them were going to keep deposits, sure, but others were actually going to give us most of our money back. I tallied up the refunds, subtracted them from the total, and arrived at our actual loss. Significantly less than $28,000, but still a painful chunk of change. Then came the fun part. and by fun, I mean the part where my spite reached its final form. I split everything 50-50, because that's what partners do, right? We'd planned this wedding together, we'd made these financial commitments together, and now we were going to share the losses together. My half came to $14,000. The refunds would help, but after all was said and done, my personal loss was looking like about $5,500. Melissa's half? Exactly the same. I created a nice clean summary page on my spreadsheet with both of our names, our individual totals, and the expected refund timelines. It was beautiful. It was organized. It was completely insane that I'd done all of this in one night instead of, sleeping or crying or eating ice cream like a normal person going through a breakup. But there I sat at 2:47 in the morning, looking at my completed spreadsheet, my sent emails confirming all the cancellations, and I felt this weird sense of calm accomplishment wash over me. The wedding was gone, dismantled, erased like it had never existed except for the financial hole it had left in both of our bank accounts. I finally closed my laptop, stumbled into my bedroom, and passed out fully clothed on top of my comforter like I'd just finished running a marathon. The last thought I had before sleep took me was wondering how long it would take Melissa to realize what I'd done. Turns out, I didn't have to wait long, because the next morning I woke up to approximately 37 missed calls, 62 text messages, and the sound of someone banging on my apartment door like they were trying to break it down. I shuffled to the door, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and probably looking like I'd been on a 3-day bender, and looked through the peephole. There was Melissa, and let me tell you, she looked absolutely unhinged. Her mascara was streaked down her face like she was auditioning for a low-budget horror movie. Her hair was doing this wild thing that suggested she'd either been pulling at it or had forgotten brushes existed, and her eyes had this manic quality that would have been genuinely frightening if I wasn't still riding the high of my midnight cancellation spree. This was going to be interesting. Melissa was banging on my door like she was the landlord coming to collect 3 months of back rent, or maybe like the cops serving a warrant, and honestly either scenario would have been less dramatic than what was actually happening. The pounding was rhythmic and aggressive, the kind of knocking that says, I know you're in there, and I'm not leaving until you open this door or I break it down, whichever comes first. I stood there in my rumpled clothes from yesterday, my hair probably sticking up in 17 different directions, trying to decide if I had the energy for whatever confrontation was about to happen. Spoiler alert, I absolutely did not have the energy, but I opened the door anyway because ignoring her would only make things worse, and also my neighbors were probably already awake and judging me based on the noise level alone. I opened the door just wide enough to reach through with a box of tissues, because even in my state of complete emotional detachment, I'm not enough of a monster to let someone cry without offering them the basic dignity of something to wipe their face with. She stared at the tissue box like I'd just handed her a live snake, but eventually she grabbed a few and started dabbing at her raccoon eyes, which honestly just made the mascara situation worse by smearing it around even more. She tried to push past me into the apartment, but I held the door firm, creating this awkward standoff where she was half in the hallway and half trying to force her way inside, while I blocked her like a bouncer at a club who'd been specifically told she wasn't on the list. We need to talk, she said, and her voice had this quality that I recognized from every argument we'd ever had. That specific tone that meant she was about to try to logic her way into getting what she wanted by presenting her emotional state as irrefutable evidence that I should cave to her demands. I didn't move. I just stood there, holding the door, waiting for her to say whatever it was she'd come here to say, because I sure as hell wasn't going to make this easy for her. She started with the crying, which was probably strategy number 1 in whatever playbook she'd mentally prepared on her drive over. Big, heaving sobs about how she couldn't believe I'd actually canceled everything, how she'd woken up to emails from vendors and confused messages from family members, how her phone had been ringing nonstop since 6 a.m. with people asking what was going on. I listened to all of this with the emotional investment of someone watching a commercial for car insurance, just waiting for her to get to the actual point. Then came the negotiating phase, which was honestly fascinating to watch from a psychological perspective. She started walking back her ultimatum like a politician trying to spin their way out of a controversial statement that had been caught on camera. I didn't mean Logan had to be the man of honor, she said, her voice taking on this pleading quality that might have worked on me 48 hours ago, but now just sounded manipulative and desperate. He could just be a groomsman, or even just a regular guest. I was just being dramatic. You know how I get. Oh, I knew how she got all right. I knew exactly how she got, which is precisely why I was standing here at 7:30 in the morning blocking my own doorway like I was defending a castle from invaders. She kept talking, throwing out compromise after compromise, each one progressively more reasonable than her original demand, and I could see the panic growing in her eyes as she realized that none of it was landing. She even tried the classic, "We can work through this" line, which is relationship speak for, "Please pretend this never happened, and let me rug sweep my completely unreasonable behavior." I almost laughed at that point, and not the bitter laugh from dinner 2 nights ago, but like an actual genuine laugh at the absurdity of thinking we could just work through her demanding that her ex-boyfriend stand at our altar while we exchanged vows. Too late, sweetheart, I thought to myself. The ship didn't just sail, it sailed straight into an iceberg, sank to the bottom of the ocean, and then somehow caught fire underwater just for good measure. There was no coming back from this. No amount of negotiating or walking back statements or promising things would be different. She'd shown me exactly who she was and what she valued, and I'd responded by showing her that I wasn't the kind of guy who'd compromise on something this fundamentally insane just to avoid conflict. But here's where things got really interesting, because I'd been standing there listening to her cycle through her various emotional appeals and logical arguments, and I realized I hadn't actually told her about the financial part yet. She knew the wedding was canceled because vendors had told her, but she had no idea about the spreadsheet, about the calculations, about the fact that I divided everything 50-50 like we were dissolving a business partnership. I pulled out my phone, which was still at about 15% battery because I'd forgotten to charge it during my midnight cancellation marathon, and I pulled up my beautiful, color-coded spreadsheet. I turned the screen toward her, watching her eyes try to focus through her tears on what she was seeing. "Your share," I said, my voice completely flat and emotionless like I was reading her the terms and conditions of a software update, "is $5,500. Payable within 30 days. The crying stopped. Just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. Her tears evaporated faster than water on hot pavement in July, and I watched in real time as her expression morphed from devastated ex-fiancé to absolutely furious woman who could not believe what she was hearing. It was honestly impressive how quickly she could shift gears emotionally. If she'd put that kind of energy into not making insane demands about her ex-boyfriend, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. "You expect me to pay you?" she practically shrieked, and I was suddenly very aware that my neighbors were definitely awake now and probably had their ears pressed against their doors listening to this entire exchange like it was their morning entertainment. "Yes," I said simply, because what else was there to say? "Unless you think I should fund Logan's cameo appearance at your wedding. I'm a generous guy, Melissa. I've bought you birthday presents and anniversary dinners, and that ridiculously expensive purse you just had to have last Christmas. But I'm not quite generous enough to bankroll your ex-boyfriend's participation in what was supposed to be our wedding day." I watched her face cycle through about 15 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, rage, more rage, even more rage. And then finally this cold fury that I'd only seen a handful of times in our 4 years together. She opened her mouth, and I could see her winding up for what was probably going to be a verbal assault that would make drill sergeants proud, so I decided to head her off at the pass. "The spreadsheet breaks down all the costs, all the refunds we'll be getting back, and both of our shares. I've emailed it to you. Check your inbox when you get home." That was apparently the wrong thing to say, or maybe the right thing depending on your perspective, because she absolutely lost it. "You're insane," she yelled, loud enough that I'm pretty sure the people in the building across the street heard her. "You canceled our wedding, and now you want me to pay you like this is some kind of business transaction?" I couldn't help myself. I shrugged. "You're the one who gave me an ultimatum about turning our wedding into a reunion special for you and Logan. I just responded accordingly. You said Logan or no wedding. I chose no wedding. Actions have consequences. And in this case, the consequences come with a price tag of $5,500. She was sputtering now, trying to form words, but mostly just making incoherent angry sounds, and I could see her trying to find some angle, some argument that would make me back down. "What if I can't pay?" she finally managed to choke out. I shrugged again. Then I guess we'll add this to the list of things you can discuss with your best friend Logan. Maybe he can spot you the cash since he's so important to you. That did it. That was apparently the final straw that broke whatever composure she had left. She called me every name in the book, some creative combinations I'd never heard before, questioned my masculinity, my sanity, my basic human decency, and threw in a few comments about my mother that I'm choosing not to repeat because my mom is a saint who doesn't deserve to be dragged into this mess even verbally. She told me I was controlling, which was rich coming from the woman who'd literally given me an ultimatum. She told me I was petty, which okay, fair, the spreadsheet was definitely petty, but it was also accurate. She told me I'd regret this, that I was throwing away 4 years over nothing, that I was going to end up alone and miserable. I let her get it all out, standing there in my doorway like a therapist who was charging by the hour and had absolutely no emotional investment in whatever breakthrough or breakdown was happening in front of them. When she finally ran out of steam, standing there breathing hard and glaring at me with a look that could have melted steel, I said the only thing left to say. I'll expect payment within 30 days. Check or Venmo works fine. She screamed something that might have been another insult or might have been just a primal sound of rage. I honestly couldn't tell, and then she stormed off down the hallway, her footsteps echoing dramatically as she made her exit. I closed the door, locked it, and stood there for a minute just processing what had just happened. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother. Dude, are you okay? Melissa just posted something insane on Facebook. Oh great, I thought, here we go. Because apparently having a meltdown at my apartment wasn't enough, now she was taking this public. I didn't even want to look, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. So I opened Facebook and there it was, a novella-length post about toxic masculinity and controlling men and how she'd dodged a bullet. The irony was completely lost on her, but her friends were already commenting with supportive messages and angry emojis. I closed the app without responding, because engaging with that circus was not on my agenda for today. But apparently the universe wasn't done with me yet, because my phone rang, and the caller ID showed Linda Gray, which was Melissa's mother, and I knew immediately that this was about to get so much worse. Linda called me that afternoon, right around 2 p.m., which I knew because I'd been staring at my phone for the past 6 hours watching the notifications roll in from various family members and friends who'd seen Melissa's Facebook manifesto and wanted to know what the hell was going on. I'd been ignoring most of them, sending out generic, I'll explain later texts to the people I actually cared about, but when Linda's name popped up on my screen, I knew I couldn't avoid this one. Linda Gray was Melissa's mother, and if Melissa was dramatic, Linda was dramatic turned up to 11 and then amplified through a stadium sound system. The woman had never had a private feeling in her entire life. Everything was a production, everything was a crisis, and everything somehow always ended up being about her even when it had absolutely nothing to do with her. I took a deep breath, said a little prayer to whatever deity handles awkward phone calls with future ex-mothers-in-law, and answered. Adrian, sweetheart, she cooed into the phone, and I immediately felt every single one of my internal alarm systems start blaring. Linda only called me sweetheart in 2 situations, when she wanted something from me, or when she was about to verbally destroy me while pretending to be nice about it. This was definitely the second one. I didn't say anything, just waited for her to continue, because I'd learned over the past 4 years that trying to interrupt Linda was like trying to stop a freight train with a strongly worded suggestion. She was going to say what she was going to say, and the best strategy was to just let her get it all out, and then respond when she finally paused for breath. I just got off the phone with Melissa, she continued, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that Southern women use when they're about to tell you exactly how disappointed they are in you. And she's absolutely devastated, just heartbroken, and I have to say, Adrian, I'm very surprised at you. Very surprised indeed. Here it comes, I thought, gripping my phone a little tighter. Melissa only wanted her best friend there on her special day, Linda said, and I could practically hear her clutching her pearls through the phone. Logan has been such an important part of her life, and it's not like she was asking for anything unreasonable. She just wanted someone who understands her to be part of the celebration. I let her finish that sentence, counted to 3 in my head to make sure she was actually done, and then said very calmly, Linda, her best friend is her ex-boyfriend who cheated on her with her roommate. The same ex-boyfriend she cried about for months. The same guy who she told me she never wanted to see again. That best friend? There was a pause, and I could almost hear Linda's brain recalibrating, trying to find a new angle of attack since I'd just completely dismantled her first attempt. Well, yes, but people change, Adrian. They grew past that difficult time and built a beautiful friendship from the ashes of their relationship. That's very mature of both of them. And frankly, I think you could learn something from their ability to move forward. I actually had to pull the phone away from my ear for a second and look at it, just to make sure I was actually hearing what I thought I was hearing. Was she seriously trying to give me life lessons about maturity while defending her daughter's insane request to have her ex-boyfriend as her man of honor? This was beyond parody at this point. Linda, I said, trying to keep my voice even and failing slightly. Melissa gave me an ultimatum. She said either Logan stands at our altar or there's no wedding. Those were her exact words. I didn't cancel the wedding on a whim. I canceled it because she made it very clear that having her ex-boyfriend in our wedding party was more important to her than marrying me. Another pause, this one longer, and when Linda spoke again, her voice had lost some of that sugary coating and was starting to show the steel underneath. "You're being controlling," she said, and there it was, the magic word that I'd been waiting for. Controlling. The go-to accusation for whenever a man has the audacity to have boundaries or standards or basic self-respect. I'd been called controlling before, usually by people who didn't like being told no, and it never failed to amaze me how setting reasonable limits on completely unreasonable behavior somehow made me the bad guy in these scenarios. "Oh, thank God you said that," I replied, and I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice anymore. "I've been playing toxic relationship bingo all morning, and you just helped me complete my card. Let's see. I've been called insane, petty, emotionally stunted, and now controlling. That's a full house right there. Do I win anything? Or do we need to wait for someone to call me a narcissist before I can claim my prize?" Linda made this huffing sound that suggested she was not amused by my tone, which was fine because I wasn't particularly amused by being lectured about maturity by a woman who'd raised a daughter that thought ultimatums were an acceptable negotiating tactic in relationships. "This is exactly the kind of attitude that caused this problem in the first place," Linda snapped, the fake sweetness completely gone now and replaced with pure maternal indignation. "You're being sarcastic and dismissive instead of trying to understand where Melissa is coming from emotionally. She's hurting, Adrian. She's confused and scared, and she just lost the man she thought she was going to spend the rest of her life with." I almost felt bad for a second. I really did, because when Linda put it like that, it almost sounded like I was the villain in this story. But then I remembered the actual sequence of events, how none of this would have happened if Melissa hadn't decided that her ex-boyfriend's presence at our wedding was non-negotiable, and the sympathy evaporated like morning dew in the desert. She didn't lose me, Linda. She threw me away. There's a big difference. She made a choice. She chose Logan over me, over our relationship, over 4 years together and all the plans we'd made. I just had the audacity to take her at her word and actually cancel the wedding like she said she wanted. If she's hurting now, that's on her, not me. I could hear Linda's breathing getting heavier on the other end of the line, that specific pattern that meant she was working herself up into a full rant, and I braced myself for whatever was about to come out of her mouth next. "You know what your problem is, Adrian," she said, her voice rising in both volume and pitch. "Your problem is that you're so focused on being right that you can't see the bigger picture. So what if Logan was there? So what if he stood next to Melissa during the ceremony? It's one day, a few hours out of your entire life together, and you threw away everything over your ego." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing at that assessment, because reducing my objection to having my fiance's ex-boyfriend as a prominent figure in our wedding to ego was so wildly missing the point that I wasn't even sure where to begin. It's not about ego, Linda. It's about respect. It's about Melissa showing me that she valued her friendship with her ex-boyfriend more than she valued my feelings or our relationship. It's about her thinking it was acceptable to give me an ultimatum about something this important. And honestly, if you can't see why that's a problem, then I understand exactly where Melissa learned this behavior. That was apparently a bridge too far, because Linda unleashed a tirade that would have made a longshoreman blush. She went off about how I was disrespectful, how I'd wasted her daughter's time, how I was clearly not mature enough to handle a real relationship, how the family had never been fully convinced I was good enough for Melissa anyway, but they'd given me the benefit of the doubt, and on and on and on. I held the phone away from my ear and let her vent, watching my cat walk by and thinking about how much simpler life would be if human relationships worked like cat relationships, where you just hissed at each other until someone backed down and then you both went on with your lives. Eventually, Linda ran out of steam or breath or both, and there was this moment of silence where I could hear her ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "Are you done?" I asked, my voice completely flat, because I have some emails to send. She made this sound that was half gasp and half shriek, and then she said the thing that I'd been expecting from the beginning of this call. "Don't you dare talk to me like that, you arrogant little." And then she hung up on me mid-insult, which was honestly kind of disappointing because I was curious to hear what creative name she'd been about to call me. I looked at my phone, saw that the call had ended, and felt this weird sense of relief wash over me. That was done. Linda had said her piece. I defended myself, and now I could add, got screamed at by ex-future mother-in-law, to my list of achievements for the day. I tossed my phone on the couch and walked to my kitchen to make some coffee, because clearly I was going to need the caffeine to deal with whatever fresh hell was coming next. I didn't have to wait long. By the evening, Melissa had apparently decided that the private Facebook post wasn't enough, and she'd upgraded to a full public manifesto that showed up on my feed, even though I'd unfollowed her 3 hours ago. It was a masterpiece of selective memory and victim narrative, painting me as some controlling tyrant who couldn't handle the fact that she had male friends, conveniently leaving out the part where said male friend was her ex-boyfriend, and she demanded he be her man of honor via ultimatum. The post talked about insecure men who can't handle strong women, which was such a tired trope that I almost respected the audacity of using it in this context. Strong women don't need their ex-boyfriends at their weddings. Strong women don't issue ultimatums. Strong women communicate and compromise and don't blow up their relationships over something this stupid. But hey, what did I know? I was just the controlling ex-fiancé who'd had the nerve to have boundaries. Her friends ate it up, of course. The comments were a chorus of "you're better off without him," and his loss, and "you deserve someone who supports you," along with about 50 variations of the strong, independent woman emoji. I watched this digital pile-on happening in real time and realized I had a choice. I could engage, I could defend myself, I could screenshot our actual text conversation where she'd given me the ultimatum and post it for everyone to see, or I could take the high road and just not respond at all. The high road seemed boring, but it also seemed smart, because getting into a social media war with my ex-fiancée and her army of supportive friends was not going to make me look good no matter how right I was. So I did something radical. I didn't respond. I didn't comment. I didn't make my own post. I didn't try to set the record straight or defend my honor or any of that dramatic nonsense. I just sent the same simple line to anyone who actually reached out to me privately to ask what happened. She said Logan or no wedding. I chose no wedding. That was it. No elaboration, no emotional appeals, no trying to make myself look like the victim. Just the facts, stated plainly, and let people draw their own conclusions. Most of my actual friends got it immediately. A few of Melissa's friends tried to argue with me, but I just repeated the same line and refused to engage further. But apparently, the universe had decided that I hadn't suffered enough public humiliation for one day, because that's when I got the notification that someone had tagged me in a comment thread, and when I clicked on it, I discovered that the drama was about to reach a whole new level, because the man himself, Logan, had apparently decided it was time to get involved in this circus, and he wanted to meet with me face to face. I was at work 3 days later, sitting at my desk trying to pretend that my life hadn't completely imploded and that I was a normal, functional human being who could focus on quarterly reports and budget projections, when my desk phone rang. Not my cell, which would have made sense, but my actual work desk phone that literally nobody ever called except for IT when they needed to restart my computer remotely, or my boss, when he was too lazy to walk 15 feet to my office. I picked it up, expecting some mundane work thing, and instead heard our receptionist Donna's voice, tinged with confusion and what might have been amusement. "Adrian, there's a, gentleman here to see you. Says his name is Logan." She said, "gentleman," the way you'd say mysterious clown or potential security threat, and I immediately knew exactly who it was, and also that my day was about to get significantly weirder. I told Donna I'd be right down, hung up the phone, and sat there for a solid 30 seconds trying to figure out what the hell Logan thought he was doing showing up at my workplace like this was some kind of intervention or mediation session. I took the elevator down to the lobby, running through possible scenarios in my head, and when the doors opened, there he was, standing by the reception desk looking exactly like I remembered from the handful of times Melissa had dragged me to social events where he'd been present. Logan Mitchell, still coasting on whatever charisma had gotten him through college, still wearing that stupid fraternity ring on his right hand like it was some kind of achievement to have paid dues to a social club 10 years ago. He was dressed in business casual, which on him meant jeans that probably cost more than my monthly car payment and a button-down shirt that was trying way too hard to look effortlessly cool. His hair had that deliberately messy look that I'm convinced takes people like 45 minutes to achieve with product and specific styling techniques. And he had this expression on his face that was probably meant to look serious and concerned, but mostly just made him look constipated. He saw me approaching and straightened up, squaring his shoulders like he was about to go into battle or negotiate a hostage situation. And I had to fight the urge to just turn around and go back upstairs because I already knew this conversation was going to be ridiculous. "Adrian," he said, extending his hand like we were business associates meeting for lunch. "Thanks for seeing me, man." I looked at his hand, looked back at his face, and very deliberately did not shake it, because we were not man, and I sure as hell hadn't agreed to see him. He'd just shown up at my place of employment like a stalker with good intentions. "Logan," I said flatly, "this is my workplace. What are you doing here?" He had the audacity to look slightly offended that I wasn't rolling out the welcome wagon for him, like he'd expected me to be thrilled that my ex-fiance's ex-boyfriend had tracked down where I worked and shown up unannounced. "I tried calling you," he said, which was news to me, "but you didn't answer, so I figured maybe we could talk face-to-face, man-to-man, and sort this whole thing out." The way he said man-to-man made it sound like we were cowboys about to have a showdown at high noon, and I had to resist the urge to laugh in his face because this entire situation was so absurd that it felt like I was living in a bad sitcom. I glanced at Donna, who was very obviously pretending to be busy with paperwork while absolutely eavesdropping on every word of this conversation, and I realized I had two choices. Have this conversation in my office lobby where it would be water cooler gossip for the next 3 weeks, or take Logan somewhere private and get this over with quickly so I could get back to pretending to work. I chose option 2, mostly because I didn't want to give Donna any more ammunition for her lunch break stories. "Conference room 2, I told Logan, gesturing toward the hallway. 5 minutes, and then you're leaving." He nodded eagerly, like a puppy who'd just been told he could come inside, and followed me down the hall to one of our smaller conference rooms, the ones we used for phone interviews and performance reviews, and apparently uncomfortable conversations with your ex's ex. I held the door open, let him walk in first, and then closed it behind us, leaving it unlocked because the last thing I needed was someone thinking something weird was happening behind closed doors. Logan sat down at the conference table, and I deliberately remained standing, leaning against the wall with my arms crossed, because I'd learned in my years of corporate life that standing while someone else sits gives you a psychological advantage that's subtle but effective. He looked up at me, and I could see him trying to figure out how to start this conversation he'd apparently rehearsed in his head on the drive over. "Look, Adrian," he finally said, leaning forward with his elbows on the table like he was about to share some profound wisdom. "I know things got messy between you and Melissa, and I feel partially responsible for that." Partially responsible. That was rich. The guy who was the entire cause of this mess felt partially responsible, like he'd maybe contributed 5% to the problem instead of being the literal central issue. "You feel partially responsible," I repeated, keeping my voice neutral, "because you are entirely responsible. If you weren't insisting on being in our wedding, there would still be a wedding." He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable at that, shifting in his seat and running his hand through his carefully styled hair in a way that probably ruined whatever product he'd used to make it look artfully disheveled. "It wasn't my idea," he said, which was such a classic deflection that I almost respected it. "Melissa wanted me there. I told her it might be weird, but she insisted, said she couldn't imagine her wedding day without me there, and I figured if it was that important to her, I should support her." I stared at him for a long moment, processing the fact that he'd just admitted that Melissa had wanted him at the wedding so badly that she'd been willing to lose me over it. And he'd gone along with it because apparently nobody in this entire situation had the common sense to realize how completely insane this plan was. So you knew it would cause problems, I said slowly. You knew it was weird. You knew I probably wouldn't be thrilled about my fiancé's ex-boyfriend standing at our altar, and you just went along with it anyway because Melissa wanted you there? Logan started to respond, but I cut him off because I was on a roll now and 4 days of accumulated frustration was starting to bubble to the surface. Let me ask you something, Logan. When you were dating Melissa and you decided to sleep with her roommate, did you feel partially responsible for that relationship ending too? Or is this just your thing, being partially responsible for destroying Melissa's relationships while pretending you're just an innocent bystander? His face flushed, and I could see anger starting to flash in his eyes, which honestly felt pretty satisfying because Mr. Fraternity Ring didn't like having his past mistakes thrown in his face. That was years ago, he said through gritted teeth, and Melissa and I worked through that. We're friends now. Good friends. Best friends, actually. And part of being someone's best friend is being there for them during important life moments. Cool, I said, pushing off from the wall and moving toward the door. Then as her best friend, you can be there for her while she copes with being single, because that's the life moment she's currently experiencing, largely thanks to you. I had my hand on the doorknob when Logan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor in a way that was probably more dramatic than he'd intended. Man, come on, he said, and there was a pleading quality to his voice now that suggested we were getting to the real reason he'd shown up here. Can't you just let Melissa have this? It's one day. I'll stand where you want me to stand. I'll keep a low profile. I'll even skip the reception if it makes you feel better. Just give her the wedding back. She's devastated. She's been crying for days. I turned around slowly, letting his words hang in the air for a moment, because I wanted him to really think about what he'd just said. Let me make sure I understand, I said carefully. You want me to reinstate a canceled wedding, after my fiancé gave me an ultimatum about you being in it, so that she can have her special day with you standing next to her, while I presumably stand there like an idiot pretending I'm okay with the whole situation? Logan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and I could literally see his brain trying to find a way to make that sound reasonable. When you put it like that, he started, but I was already done with this conversation. There is no wedding, Logan. The venue is canceled, the caterer is canceled, the photographer is canceled, even the stupid mariachi band my mother insisted on is canceled. It's over. Done. Finito. And honestly, the fact that you showed up here thinking you could somehow talk me into reversing all of that just proves you're exactly as clueless as I thought you were. I opened the door, held it open in a way that made it very clear he should walk through it, and waited. Logan stood there for a moment, looking like someone had just explained to him that Santa Claus wasn't real and also he owed back taxes, and then he shook his head slowly. You actually canceled everything, he said, and he sounded genuinely shocked, like he'd thought this was all some kind of bluff or negotiating tactic. Yes, I confirmed. I actually canceled everything. Sent emails, got confirmations, made a spreadsheet, the whole 9 yards. Very thorough, very final. Logan walked toward the door, pausing when he got close enough that I could smell whatever cologne he'd bathed in that morning, something expensive and trying way too hard. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. Melissa loved you. She still loves you. This is all just a misunderstanding. I smiled, not a friendly smile, more like the smile you give someone who's just told you that up is down and black is white. The only misunderstanding was me thinking Melissa and I were on the same page about basic relationship boundaries. But hey, thanks for clearing that up for me. Logan left without another word, walking down the hallway and disappearing around the corner, and I stood there in the doorway of the conference room, feeling simultaneously vindicated and exhausted. I went back to my office, closed the door, and sat at my desk staring at my computer screen without actually seeing anything on it. Donna instant messaged me about 3 minutes later. So that was interesting. You okay? I typed back, peachy, and put my headphones on to discourage any further conversation, because I'd hit my limit for uncomfortable interpersonal interactions for the day. But the universe, in its infinite wisdom and terrible sense of timing, was not done with me yet. Because as I was packing up to leave that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa, and when I opened it, I saw a wall of text that started with "Logan told me what you said," and only got more unhinged from there. I skimmed it, caught words like heartless and cruel and regret this, and I was about to just delete it when another text came through, this one much shorter. Also, I mentioned you want me to pay $5,500 to Logan, and now he won't talk to me. Thanks a lot. I stared at that message for a solid minute, rereading it 3 times to make sure I was understanding correctly. She'd told Logan about the money, about how she owed me $5,500 for her half of the wedding expenses. And apparently Logan had not responded well to this information, which, honestly, was kind of hilarious. I texted back a simple, "You're welcome," with a smiley face emoji, which I knew would infuriate her but felt appropriate given the circumstances. And then I put my phone on silent and drove home. 2 weeks went by, during which I heard nothing from Melissa, nothing from Logan, and nothing from Linda, which was honestly the most peaceful 2 weeks I'd had in months. And then, just when I was starting to think maybe this whole drama was finally over, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number, and when I answered it, a woman's voice said, "Hi, is this Adrian? This is Ashley, Logan's girlfriend. Well, ex-girlfriend. We need to talk." Ashley calling me was not on my bingo card for things that could possibly happen as a result of this entire mess. But honestly, at this point, I shouldn't have been surprised by anything anymore. I'd been through ultimatums, midnight cancellation sprees, emotional confrontations, social media character assassinations, workplace ambushes, and threatening texts from my ex-fiancé. So getting a phone call from my ex-fiancé's ex-boyfriend's now apparently ex-girlfriend was just par for the course in this absolute circus my life had become. I answered the phone with a cautious hello because I had no idea what to expect from this conversation, and Ashley jumped right in without any preamble or small talk. "So, I dumped Logan," she said, her voice this interesting mix of anger and satisfaction, like someone who'd just finished a really good workout after being mad about something. "And I wanted to thank you, actually, because if this whole wedding drama hadn't happened, I probably would have wasted another year of my life on that idiot." I sat down on my couch, because something told me this was going to be a longer conversation than I'd anticipated, and I had questions. So many questions. "Okay," I said slowly. "I'm going to need you to back up and explain how exactly I'm responsible for your breakup with Logan, because from my perspective, I've been trying very hard to have nothing to do with Logan at all." Ashley laughed, and it was one of those genuine laughs that told me she was actually enjoying this conversation, which was weird, but also kind of refreshing after weeks of dealing with people who were mad at me or disappointed in me or trying to guilt-trip me into undoing the wedding cancellation. "Oh, honey," she said, and I could hear her settling into storytelling mode. "You're not responsible for the breakup. Logan and your ex are responsible for the breakup. You just inadvertently gave me the information I needed to finally see what was right in front of my face this whole time." She went on to explain that Logan had come home from his little workplace visit to me absolutely furious, ranting about how I was being unreasonable and stubborn and throwing away a good relationship over nothing. Ashley had tried to be supportive, playing the role of understanding girlfriend, but something about the way Logan was talking about Melissa had bothered her. It was too invested, too emotional, too personal for someone who was supposedly just being a good friend. So Ashley had done what any reasonable person in the 21st century would do. She'd gone through Logan's phone while he was in the shower. I know, she said, and I could almost hear her waving away the judgment she probably expected. Going through someone's phone is a privacy violation and all that, but I had a gut feeling, and my gut was absolutely right. What she'd found in Logan's phone was apparently a greatest hits collection of emotional affair red flags. Text conversations with Melissa that went way beyond normal friendship territory, late-night calls that Ashley hadn't known about, discussions about their past relationship that were way too nostalgic and wistful for people who were supposedly just friends now. There was this one text, Ashley said, and her voice got harder, angrier, where Melissa was saying how she wished things had worked out differently with them, how she sometimes wondered what their life would have been like if he hadn't cheated, and Logan was eating it up, telling her he thought about that too, that she was still so important to him. All this emotional affair bullshit. I sat there processing this information, feeling this weird mix of vindication and horror, because on one hand it confirmed that my instincts about Logan had been absolutely correct, but on the other hand it meant that Melissa had been carrying on some kind of emotional thing with her ex while planning a wedding to me. which was somehow even worse than I'd thought. So you confronted him, I said, more statement than question, because I could tell where this story was going. Oh, I confronted him all right, Ashley confirmed, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Showed him the screenshots I'd taken of his texts. Asked him to explain what the hell I think about us two meant when his supposedly platonic best friend was talking about their past relationship. Logan had apparently tried the classic deflection tactics. It wasn't what it looked like. Ashley was reading too much into innocent conversations. He and Melissa were just close friends working through their complicated history, blah blah blah. But Ashley, bless her heart, was not having any of it. She told him that if Melissa was that important to him, if he couldn't stop having emotionally intimate conversations with her, then maybe he should just be with Melissa and stop wasting Ashley's time. And you know what he said? Ashley asked, her voice rising with indignation. He said he couldn't be with Melissa because she was engaged to you, but that once she was married and settled down, their friendship would probably become less intense. Like he was literally waiting for you to marry her so he could keep having his emotional affair with her while she was your wife. Can you believe that? I could believe it, actually, because it tracked perfectly with everything else I'd learned about Logan over the past few weeks. The guy had all the self-awareness of a brick wall and apparently thought that being someone's emotional backup boyfriend while they were married to someone else was a totally normal and healthy dynamic. So you dumped him, I said. So I dumped him, Ashley confirmed. Told him to pack his stuff, which wasn't much because he'd never fully moved in, thank God, and get out of my apartment. He tried to argue, tried to say I was overreacting, and I literally laughed in his face and told him to go cry to Melissa about it since she was clearly the most important woman in his life anyway. I found myself actually liking Ashley, this woman I'd never met who'd somehow gotten dragged into the same mess I was dealing with. Good for you, I told her genuinely. Seriously, that took guts, and you deserve way better than whatever that situation was. Thanks, she said, and her voice softened a bit. And honestly, you deserve better too. Which is actually the other reason I called. This is where the conversation took a turn I hadn't expected, because Ashley proceeded to send me, right there over text while we were still on the phone, about 15 screenshots of conversations between Logan and Melissa. I figured you might want these, she explained. Not for revenge or anything petty like that, but just so you know you made the right call canceling that wedding. These texts go back months, Adrian. Months. While she was engaged to you, while you guys were planning your wedding, she was texting Logan about how conflicted she felt, how she loved you but missed what she had with Logan, how she didn't know if she was making the right choice. I opened the screenshots as she was talking, scrolling through message after message that made my stomach turn. Melissa telling Logan she dreamed about him. Logan telling Melissa she was the one who got away. Both of them dancing around, actually saying anything definitive, but clearly maintaining some kind of emotional connection that went way beyond friendship. One text in particular stood out, from about 2 months before the wedding ultimatum. Melissa had written, "Sometimes I think the only way I'll ever really get over you is if you're physically there to see me marry someone else. Like maybe if you're standing right there when I say my vows, I'll finally have closure." And Logan had responded, "Whatever you need, Mel. I'll always be there for you." I read that exchange 3 times, feeling this cold realization wash over me. The man of honor thing hadn't been some spur-of-the-moment request. She'd been planning it for months, working up to asking me, and Logan had been in on it the whole time. It was calculated, premeditated, and somehow that made it so much worse than if it had just been a random impulsive demand. "Are you okay?" Ashley asked, and I realized I'd been silent for probably a full minute just staring at my phone. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "It's just a lot to process. I mean, I knew something was off, obviously, or I wouldn't have canceled the wedding. But seeing it all laid out like this is different." Ashley made a sympathetic noise. "I know. Trust me. I spent 3 days reading through these messages and feeling like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. But here's the thing, Adrian, we're not the idiots in this situation. They are. Logan and Melissa are the ones who couldn't figure out their shit and dragged us into their mess. And now they can deal with the consequences." She had a point, and hearing someone else validate my decision to walk away from Melissa made me feel less crazy than I had in weeks. "So what happened after you dumped him?" I asked, because I was genuinely curious about how Logan had handled being kicked to the curb. Ashley laughed again, that same satisfied laugh from earlier. Oh, it gets better. After I kicked him out, he apparently went straight to Melissa's place to cry on her shoulder about his mean ex-girlfriend who didn't understand their special bond. And Melissa, bless her heart, made the catastrophic mistake of mentioning your little $5,000 invoice to him. I sat up straighter, suddenly very interested in where this was going. She told him about the money? I asked. Oh, she told him about the money, Ashley confirmed. Apparently, she was hoping he'd offer to help her pay it, or at least be sympathetic about how cruel you were being asking her to pay for half of the wedding she canceled. But Logan, wonderful emotionally supportive Logan, completely freaked out. According to Ashley, who'd heard about this from a mutual friend who'd heard about it from Melissa's roommate, Logan had basically lost his mind when Melissa mentioned the $5,000 debt. He'd gone off about how the wedding cancellation wasn't his fault, how he'd tried to talk to me man-to-man and fix things, how Melissa was the one who'd given the ultimatum, so she should deal with the financial consequences. And then, Ashley said, clearly enjoying this part of the story, he apparently said something about how if Melissa couldn't afford to pay for her own mistakes, maybe she needed to grow up and stop making emotional decisions that she couldn't handle the fallout from. I actually laughed at that, because the irony of Logan lecturing anyone about emotional maturity was almost too much to handle. So they fought, I guessed. Oh, they fought, Ashley confirmed. Big blowout, lots of crying, accusations thrown around, the whole drama. And then Logan told Melissa that maybe they needed some space to figure out their friendship, and he left. That was 2 days ago, and according to my sources, they haven't spoken since. I absorbed this information, trying to figure out how I felt about it. Part of me was satisfied that their grand friendship was imploding under the weight of actual real-world consequences. Part of me just felt tired, like all of this drama was exhausting even from the sidelines. So why are you telling me all this? I asked Ashley. Because you did me a favor, she said simply. If this whole mess hadn't happened, if you hadn't canceled the wedding and forced everything out into the open, I'd still be with Logan. He'd still be emotionally cheating on me with your fiancé, and we'd both be miserable without even knowing why. So thank you. Genuinely. You saved us both a lot of wasted time. We talked for a few more minutes, exchanging stories about our respective relationships with Logan and Melissa, and by the end of the call, I felt this weird sense of camaraderie with this woman I'd never met. She wished me luck, I wished her the same, and we ended the call with a mutual agreement that we both dodged major bullets. I sat there on my couch after we hung up, looking at the screenshots she'd sent me, and I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't quite closure, but it was close. Validation, maybe. Confirmation that walking away had been not just the right choice, but the only sane choice I could have made. My phone buzzed again, and I looked down expecting maybe a follow-up text from Ashley, but instead it was from a number I recognized, Melissa's dad, Robert. The message was short. Can we meet for a beer? I owe you an apology. Robert Gray was probably the only member of Melissa's family who I genuinely liked, which made the whole situation even more awkward because I was pretty sure I was never going to see him again after this mess was over, and that was actually kind of sad. We met at a bar 3 days after his text, one of those dive places with peanut shells on the floor and sports playing on every TV, the kind of establishment where nobody cared about your drama because they all had their own problems to deal with. I got there first, grabbed a booth in the back corner away from the main crowd, and ordered a beer while I waited. Robert showed up about 10 minutes later looking exactly like a man who'd spent the past few weeks being caught in the crossfire of his daughter's relationship implosion. He was in his late 50s, graying hair, tired eyes, and he walked with the kind of heavy step that suggested he was carrying the weight of the world, or at least the weight of his family's bullshit on his shoulders. He spotted me, raised a hand in greeting, and made his way over to the booth, sliding in across from me with a heavy sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. "Adrian," he said, and his voice had this quality of exhausted sincerity that immediately told me this wasn't going to be a confrontation like I'd half expected. "Thanks for meeting me. I know you probably don't want anything to do with my family right now, and I wouldn't blame you for that, but I needed to talk to you face to face." I nodded, taking a sip of my beer and waiting for him to continue, because I'd learned over the past few weeks that sometimes the best strategy in uncomfortable conversations was to just shut up and let the other person say what they needed to say. Robert ordered a beer from the waitress who'd appeared at our table, waited until she left, and then leaned back in the booth with another one of those soul-deep sighs. "I'm not here to defend Melissa," he started, and I felt some of the tension I'd been holding in my shoulders release a bit, because at least I wasn't going to have to sit through another lecture about how I should have just gone along with the Logan plan. "I'm not here to make excuses for her or try to talk you into giving her another chance or any of that. I'm just here because I owe you an understanding, or maybe an explanation. I'm not sure which." He paused while the waitress brought his beer, took a long drink, and then looked me straight in the eye with an expression that was equal parts apologetic and exhausted. "Melissa gets this from her mother," he said bluntly, and I almost choked on my beer because I had not expected him to just come right out and throw Linda under the bus like that. The ultimatums, the drama, the inability to see how her actions affect other people. Linda's been doing that same thing for our entire marriage, and I enabled it, just went along with it to keep the peace. And now I'm watching my daughter do the exact same thing and destroy her own relationship, because I never taught her that you can't just steamroll people to get what you want. I sat there processing this unexpected confession, watching Robert stare down at his beer like it held the answers to all of life's problems. "For what it's worth," he continued, "I told Melissa the Logan thing was insane. The minute she mentioned it to me, before she ever brought it up to you, I told her it was a terrible idea and you'd never go for it. But she insisted, said you'd understand, said Logan was important to her, and you'd just have to deal with it." The way he said "just have to deal with it" made it clear he'd heard that phrase a lot in his own life, probably from Linda, and I suddenly understood so much more about the family dynamic I'd been dealing with for 4 years. "Linda backed her up, of course," Robert said with a bitter laugh. "Told Melissa she had every right to have whoever she wanted in her wedding party, that if you really loved her you'd support her friendships. All that manipulative garbage that sounds reasonable on the surface, but is actually just emotional blackmail dressed up in progressive language." He took another drink of his beer, and I could see him gathering his thoughts for whatever he was about to say next. "I want you to understand something, Adrian. What you did, canceling that wedding, standing your ground, refusing to back down even when Melissa and Linda and everyone else was calling you every name in the book, that took guts. Real guts. And it was the right thing to do, even if nobody else in my family can see that." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and let him continue. "I spent 30 years of my marriage giving in to Linda's ultimatums," he said quietly, and there was something raw in his voice now, something vulnerable that made me understand why he'd wanted to have this conversation in person. Every time she'd threatened to leave, or give me some my way or the highway choice, I'd cave. I'd tell myself it was because I loved her, because marriage is about compromise, because keeping the family together was worth sacrificing my own feelings. And you know what I have to show for it? A wife who doesn't respect me, a daughter who thinks relationships work through manipulation, and a whole lot of regrets about the man I could have been if I'd just stood up for myself once in a while. He looked up from his beer, meeting my eyes again, and I saw genuine pain there mixed with something that might have been pride. "You did what I should have done 30 years ago. You called her bluff, you set a boundary, and you stuck to it even when it cost you something you cared about. That's integrity, son. That's self-respect." And Melissa needed to learn that the world doesn't revolve around her wants and that actions have consequences. The waitress came by to check if we needed anything else, and Robert ordered us both another round without asking if I wanted one, which was fine because I definitely did. After she left, he pulled out his wallet, and I felt my stomach drop because I had a feeling I knew where this was going. "How much does she owe you?" he asked, and I shook my head immediately. "Robert, you don't have to," I started, but he held up a hand to stop me. "How much?" he repeated, more firmly this time. I sighed, pulled out my phone, and showed him the spreadsheet that had become my constant companion over the past few weeks. 5,500, I said quietly. "That's her half of the losses after refunds. But honestly, Robert, I don't expect you to pay for her mistakes. That's between me and Melissa." Robert looked at the spreadsheet, nodded slowly, and then pulled out his checkbook, which honestly I hadn't seen anyone use in about 5 years, but apparently Robert was old school about these things. "Consider this a family apology," he said as he started writing. "You deserved better than what Melissa gave you, better than the way my family treated you through all this. And the least I can do is make sure you're not out of pocket for a wedding that never should have gotten to the point of cancellation in the first place." I watched him write out a check for $5,500, his handwriting careful and deliberate, and I felt this weird lump forming in my throat because this simple gesture of accountability meant more to me than I'd expected it to. He tore the check out, slid it across the table to me, and I just stared at it for a moment. "I can't take this," I said, even though part of me really wanted to because $5,500 is not nothing, and I wasn't exactly rolling in extra cash these days. "Yes, you can," Robert said firmly. "And you will, because I'm not giving you a choice about it. This is money Melissa owes you. And since she's currently living in my house rent-free and eating my food and crying on my couch about how unfair life is, I figure I've got every right to settle her debts for her." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Take the check, Adrian. Use it to do something good for yourself. Take a trip, buy something nice. I don't care what you do with it. Just don't let this whole mess leave you worse off financially than you need to be." I picked up the check, folded it carefully, and put it in my wallet, feeling this strange mix of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "Really, Robert, you didn't have to do this, but I appreciate it more than you know." He waved off my thanks with a gesture that suggested he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. "You're a good man, Adrian. Better than my daughter deserved, apparently. And I hope you find someone who appreciates that and doesn't try to play emotional chess games with your relationship." We drank our second beers in more comfortable silence, occasionally commenting on whatever sports game was playing on the TV above the bar. And for a little while, it almost felt normal, like two guys just hanging out having a drink instead of the ex-fiancé and the apologetic father navigating the aftermath of a relationship apocalypse. Eventually, Robert checked his watch and sighed. "I should get going," he said, pulling out his wallet again to pay for our drinks over my objections. "Linda's going to be pissed I met with you, and I'm sure I'll hear about it for the next week, but some things are worth the fight." He stood up, and I stood with him, and there was this awkward moment where we both weren't sure if we should shake hands or hug, or what the protocol was for saying goodbye to your ex-future father-in-law, who just paid off your ex-fiancé's debt. We ended up shaking hands, a firm, solid handshake that felt more final than I'd expected, and Robert clapped me on the shoulder with his other hand. "You take care of yourself," he said. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry my family put you through all this. You didn't deserve it." I told him I appreciated that, and I told him to take care of himself too, and then he left, walking out of the bar with that same heavy step he'd come in with. I sat back down in the booth, stared at my half-finished beer, and pulled out my wallet to look at the check again just to make sure it was real and I hadn't imagined the whole conversation. $5,500. Written in Robert's careful handwriting. A gesture of accountability from the one member of Melissa's family who actually understood what had happened and why it had happened. I finished my beer slowly, thinking about everything Robert had said, about his 30 years of giving in to ultimatums, about Melissa learning from Linda that relationships were about manipulation instead of partnership. I felt bad for Robert, honestly, spending 3 decades in a marriage where he'd never learned to stand up for himself, and I felt grateful that I'd learned that lesson now, at 32, instead of at 62 with a lifetime of regrets behind me. I paid my tab, left the bar, and drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The check in my wallet felt like more than just money. It felt like validation, like proof that I hadn't been crazy or unreasonable or any of the things Melissa and Linda had called me. I'd been right to walk away, right to set boundaries, right to refuse to compromise on something this fundamental. When I got home, I took a picture of the check and deposited it using my bank's app, watching the confirmation screen pop up and feeling this sense of closure that I hadn't expected. The money would hit my account in a few days, and I was already planning what I'd do with it. Not something practical, not paying off debt or putting it in savings or any of the responsible things I probably should have done with it. No, I was going to use that money to do something just for me, something that had nothing to do with Melissa or weddings or family drama. I pulled up flight prices to Iceland because I'd always wanted to see the northern lights, and if there was ever a time to treat myself to an adventure, this was it. But apparently, the universe had decided I'd had enough peace and quiet for one evening, because as I was browsing flight options, my phone started blowing up with notifications, text messages, missed calls, and then I saw that Melissa had posted something new on social media, and from the preview notification alone, I could tell this was going to be a special kind of dramatic. I clicked on it, and there it was, The black dress photo shoot, posted at 11 p.m. on what was supposed to have been the night before our wedding. The social media post was exactly the kind of performative grief I'd come to expect from Melissa at this point. A carefully staged photo of her in a little black dress, sitting on her bed, with perfectly arranged mood lighting that suggested she'd spent at least an hour getting the shot just right. The caption was a novel-length meditation on lost love and broken dreams, complete with poetry quotes and hashtags about healing and moving forward. It was the digital equivalent of those Victorian mourning portraits, except instead of mourning a dead spouse, she was mourning a wedding she'd torpedoed herself. I scrolled through the comments, which were predictably full of supportive friends telling her how strong she was and how she deserved better, and I was about to close the app and go back to looking at Iceland flights when my doorbell rang. At 11 p.m., on a Thursday night, I looked at my phone, looked at the door, and felt this sense of weary resignation wash over me, because I knew exactly who was standing on the other side of that door, and I knew this was going to be exhausting. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole to confirm my suspicions, and there she was, Melissa, wearing that same little black dress from the photo shoot, which meant she'd taken the pictures, posted them online, and then immediately driven to my apartment for what I assumed was going to be one final dramatic gesture. I stood there for a moment debating whether to even open the door, because I was tired, emotionally drained from the conversation with Robert, and really not in the mood for whatever performance Melissa had planned. But I also knew she wasn't going to leave. She'd just keep ringing the doorbell or knocking or eventually call the cops claiming I'd stolen something from her apartment, so I might as well get this over with. I unlocked the door, opened it but kept the chain on, and looked at her through the 3-inch gap. "It's 11 p.m., Melissa," I said flatly. "What do you want?" She looked up at me, and I could see she'd been crying again, her makeup artfully smudged in a way that looked almost intentional, like she'd carefully cultivated the look of a heartbroken woman from Maximum Impact. "Tomorrow was supposed to be our day," she said softly, her voice taking on that breathy quality she used when she was trying to be vulnerable and appealing. I didn't respond, just stood there looking at her through the gap in the door, waiting for whatever speech she'd rehearsed on the drive over. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, and I noticed she was swaying slightly, which suggested she'd maybe had a few drinks before deciding this late-night visit was a good idea. "About us, about everything that happened, about what I want." She paused dramatically, clearly expecting me to ask what she wanted, but I remained silent, and the silence stretched between us like a rubber band pulled tight. "Logan chose Ashley," she finally said, and there was genuine hurt in her voice now, the kind that wasn't performed or calculated but actually real. "He told me we needed space, that our friendship was too complicated, that he couldn't handle being in the middle of all this drama anymore." And I realized something. She looked up at me with those big eyes that had probably gotten her out of trouble her entire life, and I could see her trying to gauge whether her words were landing. "I realized that I lost you over someone who didn't even want me. I threw away 4 years with a good man because I was holding on to some fantasy about my ex-boyfriend, and now I don't have either of you." It was probably the most self-aware thing I'd heard her say in the entire time I'd known her, and if she'd come to this realization maybe a month ago, we might have had a different conversation. But standing there at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, a day before what would have been our wedding, listening to her confess that she'd torpedoed our relationship for a guy who'd now dumped her, I felt absolutely nothing. "I'm sorry," she said, and a tear rolled down her cheek in a way that looked cinematic, perfectly timed, and I wondered if she'd practiced this in the mirror before coming over. "I'm so sorry, Adrian. I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and I want to fix it. I want us to fix it. We can postpone the wedding, give ourselves time to work through this, go to couples therapy, whatever you need. Just please, please don't give up on us." She reached through the gap in the door like she was going to touch my hand, and I took a step back automatically. "Melissa," I said, and my voice was so calm it surprised even me. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose Logan over me, over our relationship, over our future together. The only reason you're here now is because Logan rejected you, and you're looking for a backup plan." Her face crumpled, and I could see her trying to formulate an argument, some way to spin what I'd just said into something that made her look less calculating. "That's not fair," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I'm here because I love you, because I realized what I lost." "No," I interrupted, and I felt something shift in my chest, something final and definitive. You're here because you lost Logan and you're scared of being alone. If Logan had welcomed you with open arms, if he'd offered to help you pay that $5,000 you owe me, if he'd validated your feelings and told you I was the bad guy, you wouldn't be standing here right now. You'd be with him, continuing whatever emotional affair you've been having for months. I watched her face cycle through shock, denial, and then anger as she realized I knew more than she'd thought I knew. Ashley told you, she said accusingly, and I almost laughed at how quickly she'd jumped to that conclusion. Ashley sent me the screenshots. I confirmed. Of your texts with Logan. All of them. The ones where you talked about missing him, wondering what your life would have been like if he hadn't cheated, needing him at the wedding for closure. All of it, Melissa. I've seen all of it. The color drained from her face, and I watched her try to figure out how to salvage this situation now that she knew I had evidence of what had really been going on. Those texts were taken out of context, she started, but her heart wasn't in it, and we both knew it was a weak defense. Adrian, please, just let me explain, but I was done. Done with the drama, done with the manipulation, done with the emotional chess games and the ultimatums and the constant feeling that I was competing with a ghost from her past. There's nothing to explain, I said, and I started to close the door. You loved Logan more than you loved me. Or at least you loved the idea of Logan more than you loved our actual relationship. And that's fine, Melissa. You're allowed to have those feelings. But you're not allowed to expect me to just accept them and marry you anyway. She started crying in earnest now, the kind of ugly crying that wasn't performed or staged, and she grabbed the doorframe like she could physically prevent me from closing the door. Please don't do this, she begged, and there was real desperation in her voice. Please, Adrian. I can change. I'll cut Logan out completely. I'll never talk to him again. Just please give me another chance. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt this overwhelming sense of sadness mixed with relief. Sadness for what we'd had and lost, for the future we'd planned that would never happen, for the woman I'd thought she was who turned out to be someone completely different. But also relief that I was seeing this now, before the wedding, before we'd legally bound ourselves together, before I'd spent years of my life trying to compete with a man she couldn't let go of. I'm not giving you another chance, Melissa, I said quietly. Not because I don't think people can change, but because I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if you're really over Logan or if you're just better at hiding your feelings for him. She opened her mouth to argue, to plead, to try one more angle, but I continued before she could speak. You gave me an ultimatum about Logan being in our wedding. I called your bluff and canceled everything. Now you're here because Logan doesn't want you and you've realized that maybe I wasn't such a bad option after all. But I'm not a backup plan, Melissa. I'm not a consolation prize for when your first choice doesn't work out. I'm someone who deserves to be someone's actual first choice, not their safe option when the exciting choice falls through. I could see understanding dawning on her face, the realization that this really was over, that there was no combination of words or tears or late-night visits that was going to change my mind. Tomorrow was supposed to be our wedding day, she said softly, one last attempt to appeal to nostalgia or sentimentality or whatever emotion she thought might crack my resolve. Yeah, it was, I agreed. But you canceled it when you decided Logan was more important than I was. I just made it official. I gently but firmly pushed her hand off the doorframe, and she let go without resistance, like all the fight had suddenly drained out of her. Good night, Melissa, I said, and I meant it with a finality that made it clear this was goodbye, not just for tonight, but forever. I closed the door, locked it, and stood there listening to her cry on the other side for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 30 seconds. Then I heard her footsteps, slow and heavy, walking away from my door and presumably back to her car. I walked to my window and looked out into the parking lot, watching her sit in her car with her head on the steering wheel, her shoulders shaking with sobs, and I felt that same mix of sadness and relief wash over me again. I stood there watching her for about 20 minutes, half concerned she might do something stupid and half just making sure she actually left, and eventually, she started her car and drove away, her taillights disappearing into the night. I went back to my couch, picked up my phone, and looked at the Iceland flight prices again, and this time I didn't just browse, I actually booked one. I selected a date 2 weeks out, picked a hotel that advertised Northern Lights tours, and entered my credit card information with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. The confirmation email arrived in my inbox, and I stared at it for a moment. This tangible proof that I was moving forward, that I was choosing myself and my own happiness over the toxic dynamic I'd been stuck in. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother. Just saw Melissa's Instagram post. You okay? I typed back. Better than I've been in a long time, actually. Also, I'm going to Iceland. He sent back a string of celebration emojis and a message saying he was proud of me, which was unexpectedly touching and made me realize how lucky I was to have family who actually supported healthy boundaries. I turned off my phone, took a long shower, and climbed into bed feeling lighter than I had in months. Tomorrow would have been my wedding day, the culmination of months of planning and thousands of dollars and countless hours of stress about seating charts and centerpieces and whether the chicken or the fish was the better entree option. Instead, I'd be going to work, living my normal life, and looking forward to a trip to Iceland that I was taking just for me, funded by the money Robert had given me as an apology for his daughter's behavior. As I drifted off to sleep, my last thought was that sometimes the best decision you can make is the one that costs you something in the short term, but saves you everything in the long term. I'd lost a fiancé, sure, but I'd gained my self-respect, my freedom, and the knowledge that I wasn't willing to settle for a relationship where I had to compete with someone's ex for their attention and affection. That seemed like a pretty good trade to me, all things considered. The next day, what would have been my wedding day, I woke up at 7 a.m. feeling weirdly peaceful. No stress about whether the flowers would arrive on time. No anxiety about whether Uncle Frank would get drunk and hit on the bridesmaids. No last-minute panic about my vows, or whether I'd remember to put on deodorant before the ceremony. Just a regular Saturday morning with absolutely nothing planned except existing as a free man. I made coffee, scrolled through my phone while deliberately avoiding social media, because I was not about to check if Melissa had posted some melodramatic message about what should have been happening today. And then my brother texted me. Fishing trip. You, me, the lake. Be ready in an hour. I didn't argue, just pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, grabbed my baseball cap, and waited for him to pick me up. We spent the entire day at the lake, sitting in his beat-up fishing boat drinking beer and catching absolutely nothing, which was perfect because the fishing was never really the point anyway. My brother didn't bring up Melissa once, didn't ask if I was okay, or if I wanted to talk about my feelings, or any of that emotional processing stuff. He just handed me beers, made stupid jokes about the fish being too smart to fall for our clearly inferior bait, and let the silence be comfortable instead of awkward. It was exactly what I needed, just hours of peace and normalcy, and remembering that life existed outside of wedding drama and relationship implosions. By the time we packed up and headed back, I felt more relaxed than I had in months, maybe even years if I was being honest with myself. That evening, my friends threw me what they called a freedom party, which was really just a barbecue in my buddy Mike's backyard. But they'd gone all out with decorations that said things like, "Congratulations on your divorce," which was technically inaccurate since I'd never actually gotten married, but the sentiment was appreciated. We played paintball in Mike's neighbor's field, which was probably illegal, but nobody called the cops, so we counted it as a win, and everyone made jokes about how at least I didn't have to learn Logan's middle name for a best man speech, which was honestly one of the better silver linings anyone had pointed out. My friend Sarah, who'd never liked Melissa and had been very vocal about it, gave a toast that was mostly just her listing all the red flags she'd noticed over the years that I'd apparently been too blind to see. And while it was kind of brutal, it was also kind of validating to know that other people had seen the problems I'd been making excuses for. Meanwhile, according to the group chat that I'd been added to by Melissa's former roommate, who apparently had switched sides in this breakup, Melissa had spent the day that should have been her wedding crying in her childhood bedroom, while Linda raged on Facebook about men who can't handle strong women. The post had apparently gotten pretty heated, with several of Linda's friends pointing out that maybe Melissa bore some responsibility for the situation, which had caused Linda to double down and start blocking people left and right. Robert, bless his heart, had apparently stayed completely silent through the whole thing, neither defending nor condemning anyone, which I respected immensely. I blocked Linda's profile without reading whatever manifesto she'd posted, because I'd reached my lifetime limit of being called controlling and insecure, and I spent the rest of the evening eating ribs and playing cornhole and feeling genuinely happy for the first time in what felt like forever. Later that night, after I'd gotten home and showered off the paint and barbecue smoke, I did something impulsive. I sold the engagement ring. I'd been holding on to it, not sure what to do with it. But sitting there looking at the Iceland confirmation email, I realized I didn't want that ring in my apartment anymore. Didn't want the reminder of what it represented. Didn't want to look at it and think about Melissa and ultimatums and emotional affairs with ex-boyfriends. So I found a reputable jeweler who bought used engagement rings, made an appointment for Monday, and decided that whatever money I got for it was going straight into my Iceland fund, because if I was going to move forward with my life, I might as well do it in style under the Northern Lights. 2 weeks later, I was standing in Iceland watching the Northern Lights dance across the sky in colors that looked photoshopped but were somehow real, and I felt more at peace than I had in years. The ring had sold for a decent amount, enough to upgrade my hotel and book a glacier tour, and standing there in the freezing cold watching nature put on a light show that made every wedding decoration I'd ever stressed about look pathetic in comparison, I realized I'd made the right choice. I took one photo, just one, and posted it to Instagram with no caption because the image spoke for itself. Within minutes, I saw that Melissa had viewed my story, and I felt absolutely nothing about it, which was probably the best indication that I was actually moving on. People back home kept asking if I regretted canceling the wedding, if I should have just let Logan be in the wedding party, if maybe I'd overreacted. And every time someone asked, I gave them the same answer: absolutely not. If I'd given in to Melissa's ultimatum, Logan would have been at every barbecue, every Christmas, every family gathering for the rest of my life. He probably would have shown up on our honeymoon with sunscreen and emotional support, invited himself to our anniversary dinners, been the first person Melissa called whenever we had an argument. I would have spent my entire marriage competing with a ghost, always wondering if I measured up to whatever idealized version of Logan existed in Melissa's head. I lost $5,500, but I gained something infinitely more valuable: my self-respect, my peace of mind, and the knowledge that I wasn't willing to settle for a relationship where I came in second place to someone's ex-boyfriend. Standing under the Northern Lights, breathing in the cold Icelandic air, I realized that sometimes the best decision you can make is the one that costs you something in the short term, but saves you everything in the long term. When someone gives you an ultimatum, they think you'll fold. They think you'll choose them over your own boundaries because the alternative is too scary or too expensive or too lonely. But sometimes the best move is to call their bluff, walk away, and book a ticket to Iceland instead. Cheap price for dodging a lifetime of Logan cameos.